Today we have the pleasure of being joined by Alejandro Biguria, who is a renowned architect, entrepreneur, urbanist, technologist, educator, activist, as well as what I am going to coin a Renaissance man. Alejandro, you have many interests with a genuine care about society. This is part of who you are because you have a vision for a better world, a better humanity, and a better Guatemala, the country where you are from. Can you tell us about your vision and how that coalesces with who you are, your background, and some of the projects you are working on?
Sure. First of all, Cindy, thanks for having me. Thanks for the invitation, and thanks for these 45 minutes where we can share, discuss, and reminisce about how we met, where we are, and where we're heading, which makes it interesting. I did a BA in economics where we met.
Yes.
Back in Boston University, which in some ways it gives you a worldview of how things work. And in retrospective, I think that was probably the best mix of having a combination of economics and architecture, because it really opens up your world in terms of understanding the different forces and how we tend to make choices, in general terms, choices for what we spend our money on, where we work. Basically, all our basic needs are based on economic terms. So I think that that really, for me, is a fundamental filter into understanding public space and architecture as a professional. After working in Boston in a private bank, I came back to Guatemala, stayed for a couple of months, went back, did my master's in architecture and certificate in real estate design and development. I taught for a year and a half, stayed in Philadelphia for 2 years, and decided to slowly make my way back to Guatemala after 13 years of being away. So to be honest, it was a bit of a shock to rediscover your own country after being away for 13 years and being surrounded by economic stability and opportunities, and being very seduced by academia in the US, because there's so much stuff going on in terms of the universities and so many different fields of study and research going on. I was lucky and I was very privileged to be in a university where basically there's so many different initiatives and areas of where you can devote your energy, your talent, and your interests, that it was very enticing. I think in some ways, I made my way back to Guatemala feeling that there was a weird sense of responsibility to coming back. And I began to rediscover my own country. And through different initiatives and in my attempt of getting myself known, I understood that I didn't really understand certain things when I left the country when I was nearly 18 years old. So for me, it was a really good awakening of understanding the richness, not only in biodiversity, but ethnically and culturally, and also in terms of our heritage. So I think that's something that I quickly got involved in and got my feet dirty. I was getting involved in any initiative that I was invited on. I was basically saying yes to a lot of stuff. I was involved in different initiatives early on in 2011. For instance, there was an initiative to break the cycle of violence between families, intrafamiliar violence. And basically it was an initiative to climb up a volcano. I was in charge of all the logistics of making. Let me show you an image so that makes a little bit more sense. And it's a little bit of eye candy for all.
That would be fabulous. And I do understand what you say in terms of the shifting perspectives, because whenever I visit Guatemala, I have this reimmersion in its culture where you start to understand how you're walking different worlds and different heritages, and how you can find some way to integrate them into the self and also find ways to show that beauty to the world.
And first, you begin to recognize you come from a very privileged group that was able to experience something outside of Guatemala and come back as well. That was a conscious choice of coming back. And that was a big sacrifice as well, because I mean, my professional opportunities in the US were probably greater. But in terms of my personal impact was probably bigger in my home country than staying in the US. So it's about challenges and really understanding what really moves you in terms of your inner core, what really makes you dream and what really stimulates you. And I think the challenges in terms of professional life in the US were great. But for some reason, my country and its people were calling me in a way that to this day, I don't completely comprehend. But going back to the image, and this is one of the images that shows in one of the volcanoes, which is not active, by the way. And it was about creating an image to the world about convergence of people, about breaking the cycle of violence within families. And this takes me to a different initiative that same year, which was about chronic malnutrition. And this is where architecture meets a little bit of solutions where you can begin to apply your knowledge and your expertise into something that's scalable, that you can actually reach different places of the country. So we designed something that was scalable. It was under $5,000. And basically the 1,000 day window, which basically is 10 different actions that help women break the cycle of chronic malnutrition through education. That's something that anybody can build anywhere within the country. And we basically made an IKEA catalog. It was easy to build and construct, and it was scalable in the sense that nobody really needed to find a way of understanding the structures or the weights and stuff. It was all image-based, no text. So it was designing the whole system, not the architecture itself. So we were able to build 2 in El Salvador, 2 in Honduras, and we were only able to build 1 in Guatemala. We understand that they're replicating the system in certain parts of Africa. We were invited by Tufts University, and we got a lot of recognition for the work because on the lines of preventive health rather than remedial health. And it's cheaper for us as a country to work on education. And given the fact that 50% of our children in the country suffer from chronic malnutrition, that's something that we had to do. This is one of the causes that you learn and you begin to understand that basically your human capital, if you want to call it that, it's working under unfavorable conditions. It's a calling as you begin to understand the intricacies of how things work in rural Guatemala, you have to get involved.
And if I may ask you, when you were talking about architecture meets functionality meets activism, these spaces that were constructed were places where women can go and receive education and be able to implement it into their everyday life?
Yes. And there's also a space where they can get themselves checked out by a gynecologist and so forth. But it's very punctual and very focused in terms of the 10 different actions of the 1,000-day window. Why it's called 1,000-day window? Because it's after conception, that's 9 months, and then 2 years after birth. That's basically when it's most important that you get all the nutrients and all the right nutrition for your development. So if you don't really take care of that window of opportunity, you're limiting your ability of your children to actually read and so forth. There's a lot of studies finding correlations between your nourishment and your capacity to understand basic concepts like social order and so forth, and even social constructs are somewhat higher level. So if 50% of your population suffers from chronic malnutrition, I mean, it's hard to find cohesion when there's an incapacity, not to say a discapacity.
Right. And so if I'm understanding you correctly, and so that our listeners and viewers are able to understand this initiative, it was a place for education, a place for preventive health care, such as women's reproductive care, a place where we're learning about the nutritional needs of not just the women, but also embryos that then become fetuses and young children, because those first 2 years, the type of nutrition and care that a young child receives is going to impact their capacity to understand certain types of concepts that relate to whether it be social order or things that you learn in school, such as mathematics, reading comprehension, and so forth, which are the building blocks so that you can have an educated and successful population. If I understood correctly, what you're trying to do with this is not just address malnutrition, but also address larger social construct needs that will help with the population in terms of how it's able to have success and innovation. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, you have, and you actually put it more eloquently than that I did. But if you think about it, it's a very analog smart house. That what it intends to do is basically beyond what is actually being built, the walls and the ceilings. It's also a referent for sustainable practices. For instance, they had a water collecting system, a solar panel, and so forth. But those are very basics. But it really comes down to having also community, the members of the community build the house and find like an excuse to actually build something that is specifically for one objective, that's fighting chronic malnutrition. Then it begins to build a social fabric and towards one objective. And then as you begin to socialize the need for that, it begins to come into an operational effect and impact, because you're teaching women, which are the basis of nutrition and caregiving for children, the tools for them to actually understand the need for folic acid and the vitamins and nutrients, iron, and all the supplements that they need through gestation.
Wow, that is impressive and really quite inspirational that, you're working on not only initiatives, but initiatives that address the most vulnerable in society so that the vulnerable people have the access to education, at least in terms of, the gestation period and basic nutrition, that somebody else that had access to more education and other items traditionally do versus women that don't. And what I equally find quite interesting, and I think that our viewers and our listeners would also find interesting, is this approach, this type of integrative approach where you have a need, you found a need. The need is we want to provide education and this initiative, but how am I going to address this need from an eco-friendly perspective that incorporates technology and architecture and finds a way for it to be accessible and affordable? And that's quite a challenge to undertake.
But it's a really interesting challenge. And I would say, rather than seeing issues, I like to see problems as a design problem, because I'm a designer at the end of the day. I'm an architect, and that's how I operate. As you begin to see all the different challenges that my country faces, there's a lot of inequalities, there's a lot of corruption, violence, and so forth. It's a great opportunity to be a designer as well, because you're actually you're creating solutions for these problems. So as a designer, I see tons of opportunities to operate, or different territories that I can really operate on. And basically, that's why I do tell my students through talks or the different initiatives that I participate, is that Guatemala, yes, is full of problems, but it's full of opportunities if you're creative, because eventually you have to find a solution with limited resources, with limited funding or no funding. Basically, it is a design problem that affects and it has an impact if you're able to execute.
You have certain needs, limited resources, but at the same time, there are limited resources in terms of the economics of the country, but the country in and of itself is incredibly rich in other types of resources, from its biodiversity to its heritage to a population that's untapped potential, that the more the population starts to receive education through these types of initiatives, you're going to start to see a transformation. And that's what other countries have done. They've tapped in to those natural resources. And it's not easy, but it's due when people come together and get behind these types of initiatives.
I believe that we are definitely rich in resources and ethnically diverse, and we're one of the, I think it's one of the 20th most mega diverse countries in the world. If you think of us as a country, I mean, we're quite tiny, but we're highly diverse. It's precious things come in small boxes. I tend to see my country in that way, with its own sort of set of problems as well. But I think in a sense, that's what really attracts me to my own country, is that there's so much things going on. We're in the confluation of 3 tectonic plates. We got 4 or 5 different active volcanoes that are really reminding us of how vulnerable we are. The word hurricane comes from the Mayan word huracán, which means heart of the sky, corazón del cielo. So we're in the middle of all this. We're in a territory that is in constant flux. So there's a lot of energy and potential energy within its core. And in a sense, we tend to live day by day. But as designers and architects, we have a responsibility to really plan ahead and look beyond the risk and the vulnerabilities and the reminders that, yes, we really have to plan ahead and look beyond the challenges that we face on a daily basis.
That reminds me, yesterday I saw this very interesting image, and I wish I had it on me, and unfortunately I don't, but I'll describe it. North America is traditionally thought of as the eagle, and South America as the condor. Sometimes you hear about how when the eagle and the condor comes together, we're moving towards a different type of epoch or society of a type of golden age. The image that I saw was the North American eagle, the South American condor, but what was binding it together was the shape of the quetzal, which is the national bird of Guatemala, but also a bird that you see throughout Central America. So I thought it was quite fitting to talk about this idea of convergence, confluence, and that binding force, because as you said, there's multiple tectonic plates as well as volcanoes and rainforests. That's part of the biodiversity of the country, but also part of the world. So you have to protect the rainforests in Guatemala as well as other parts of Central America. So I thought I share that image. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but I thought it was rather powerful.
Yes, I do remember hearing it at some point. I mean, through all my different cultural endeavors that I've done in the last 12 years, residing in Guatemala. And yes, we are still a bridge of the good and the bad and the ugly between North Americans and South America, because we are physically a bridge that connects 2 continents, or let's say a continent.
Right.
But
there's also beauty.
Yes, of course, but it's all part of it. It's part of that balance. Yes, we're a bridge of biodiversity. I mean, how birds flock onto the north through different seasons. There's also large movement of different illicit products into the north and so forth. There's also movement of migrants into the north, but we're still a bridge. I mean, and there's a complexity inherent to being a bridge. There's always in flux. But I think one of the projects that I was involved in early in 2011 as well was an interesting project. It was kind of a out of the box thinking project. I was invited to participate on the Mayan Ancestral Medicine Center. And basically, I had no idea what it was. I do consider myself Hispanic. I don't really have any indigenous blood in me. In a way, I did feel as a foreigner within my own country because I didn't really understand what was going on. Basically, I never had the opportunity to really understand the different cosmologies that are happening within my borders. And I was invited to participate as an architect to really design the center with no precedent whatsoever, because there wasn't any Mayan inspire architecture in the last 500 years because there was no need. So basically, in a sense, my role was to really foresee the project in its conception and direct the project. But I was quite sensible in the sense that I didn't want to really impose my Western academic background or mindset in something that was very precarious in the way it was conceived, because all the decisions are made by a committee made up by 13 women and 13 men, which are priests they're called tatas and nanas, not necessarily shamans.
If I may ask, would that be the equivalent to what in North America they refer to as the grandmothers and the grandfathers, the elders within the indigenous communities? So
that's basically what it translates to. Elders, just with the Spanish connotations of female and male, but yes, the elders. I have a funny anecdote is that I brought my questionnaire that I usually brought my clients with a 10-question summary of how I was to determine the architectural program. I just got through 3 of them after 6 hours of going back and forth. So that was my first sort of shock to understand that my own cosmology wasn't really adapting into a different way of generating consensus. And that's something that I found very, very valuable in the way.
If I may interject, Alejandro, there's something that I have found within the Mayans, and I don't know if this was your experience, but they're very present moment. They're about the present. And sometimes when we come in with a Westerner or North American type of view, we often tend to be future focused. So then sometimes there's a little clash in terms of how we perceive time, how we answer questions. Is that something that you found to be the case in this particular experience?
I guess if you want to sum it up, yes. I think after 12 years of actively being involved in this project, I don't know how, in God's name, I didn't really give up. But because in terms of architecture, in terms of development projects, you tend to see them as a 6 months, maybe 12 months. But yes, the concept of time and how things are resolved and is something that was quite eye-opening and very educational for me. Just understanding that I did have a role, because I asked one of the elders, I really don't share any of the cosmology with this group, and I feel that I don't want to really bring my own DNA into this and not paying the right respects for anybody. And he simply answered, "You have a role, you have been chosen." That was really overwhelming in the sense that I felt quite responsible that I couldn't let go of this project throughout the entire process, because I was given this privilege to be part of its conception, its development, and its conclusion. So in a sense, it's been 12 years of really understanding that it's not my time, but it's actually the universe's time and place, and understanding that's something that a center which wants what it wants, and that is going back to the essence of why we're creating what it's called a Popol Jay. A Popol Jay is a house of the sacred house, like the Popol Vuh, which is the sacred book of the Mayas. This is the sacred house, and what it intends to do, which is it has been completely designed, and now they're raising funds to finally build it within the next 2 years. Provoke a place of convergence between different cosmologies of the world, of understanding natural medicine and how this knowledge and the different medicinal plants are in risk of getting lost forever. So they begin to transfer this knowledge between the elders and new generations. All this knowledge is going to get lost. And basically, universities such as ETH, Zurich, is working in beginning to helping identify, in terms of the pharmacological standpoint and the biological and all the chemistry behind all the plants, to really fully understand it, if they can actually cultivate them or not. And the meeting of the minds and the spirits, that's what the center wants to become. And most importantly, to create an institution for the young generations to actually aspire to be part of. That's something that you're building, again, a community based on yeah, let's say architecture, but that's a little bit presumptuous, but it's beyond that. You're building a place where they can meet, they can gather. And again, it's a little bit like a stage, but because it begins to throw in very subtly certain aspects of Mayan architecture, such as the identification of the summer solstice and the equinoxes, and there's ways that we're doing that through architecture. So it's bridging a lot of things. It's very ambitious as a project as well, but I think it was very stimulating to be part of it. As you are part of the project, you actually grow with the project, and that's something that I found to be very compelling.
Amazing. It sounds quite like an incredible project. And it appears to me that what's happening here is this intersectionality of tradition meets innovation, right? So the tradition of the Mayan practices of honoring the ancestors, the type of medicines that they practice, with an innovative modern twist or elements, if you will, that is incorporating, as you said, the first of its kind structure in over 500 years, because there had not been a need before based on societal changes, as well as history, colonization, etc., etc. But it also makes me think of a book called Making Memory Matter. And I think I have it here. Yes, Making Memory Matter by Lisa Saltzman. And in this book, she refers to a lot of art and some architecture, but without referencing her specific examples. I think this idea that she poses of making memory matter is important, because if you don't capture the heritage, it gets lost. And I think you had mentioned to me outside of the scope of this conversation that there is this risk that a lot of ancestral practices, a lot of heritage is at risk of being lost. And this center can create a gateway to try to recapture some lost knowledge and heritage, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that was probably one of the main drivers. It's not only about the preservation of the biodiversity, that it's inherent to Mayan medicine, which is all naturally based, but it's also the knowledge of how to cut certain plants, when to cut certain plants. That's knowledge that only the elders have been able to carry through generations by word of mouth. And that's something that basically you have to design a system that not only takes care of the plants, but that finds a way to generate an impact that is also within a circular economy that also helps the elders sustain themselves through the research and the promotion of these ancestral medicinal practices. What it's called ethnomedicine, because it's ethnically based. What's remarkable is that the holistic approach to health is very holistic in every sense. It's mind, body, spirit. That's also mainstream in Western countries now. How you begin to treat cancer, how you begin to treat different illnesses. And that's something that it needs to be amplified, different voices on how, and it's not only a small group. I mean, they've been using the medicine for centuries. So, I mean, it's relevant. And if we're losing a lot of the opportunities or potential energy within the plants that we have in this region, and we're losing the opportunities of potentially curing a disease that we don't know yet. So, I mean, it's relevant.
It's really quite exciting to also say, you know what? I was part of this. We were part of it. It was a matter of shared governance. It was a different way of doing things, of executing, of creating, but we are doing it. And it creates a legacy, not just for the elders, but also for the people to come, to learn about how you can start to integrate some of these technical aspects of design, of creation, while honoring space, right? Within the scope of ecology and green spaces, which I believe you're quite passionate about.
Yes, I think that I'm just showing for our viewers a quick image, which basically what it begins to intend. If you want to scan the QR, it will take you to a video that shows a little bit more on the project. But basically, it's well put. You really did an awesome job in summing up a lot of the interest of this project. It's funny, but as you get involved in the projects that want to generate an impact, the side effects is that it creates a big impact in yourself, because you're actually, your DNA changes as well as the way of thinking, of understanding certain things. Your sensibilities also change. You see more opportunities within the richness of understanding different ways of thinking, of understanding how there's a symbiotic relationship with nature, how we need to take care of nature as part of opportunities to actually treat illnesses as well. That's what I really love about my profession, is that it's so wide and open. And again, everything is it's a design problem that can be solved through design.
I love it. Can you tell us a little bit about the actual structure, why it's round, what the functionality behind it, as well as the ethical and ancestral elements that the design addresses?
Well, basically, it's a spiritual center where a lot of the spiritual ceremonies are conducted within the sacred center of the space. It's surrounded by a laboratory in its vicinity, and also everything around the perimeter of the center is basically where they're cultivating and experimenting plant reproduction and so forth. And within the core of the building itself, there's a lot of multi-purpose rooms where they can host different initiatives when they have different ceremonies. There's actually classrooms as well for young children and for people that come from the US or Europe if they want to take a course on different topics. They have a museum where they also hold artifacts and so forth. There's also a small botanical garden and a greenhouse as well, where they cultivate and they dry plants with a system invented by the Mayas. So there's also a seed bank, or a dry seed bank that doesn't need high or low temperatures or freezing temperatures to store, or it's mostly to store dried goods. It's a simple program. What it really intends to do is just involve or provoke a space of gathering and a place of convergence of different ideas of different peoples from different parts of the world. But basically for them, they see it as a place where they can actively promote their knowledge, and where their new generations can aspire and get inspired as well.
And now you have a new project. You're always on the go. Well, next, right? A dear project to you right now is building an observatory in Guatemala.
Yes, it's an astronomical observatory, and again, it's kind of out of the box. I was invited by somebody that I didn't know, called me up, and he's like, I want to build an observatory. I said, sure, let's do it. Let's do an architectural competition. So we launched an architectural competition worldwide. We got over 160 submissions from all over the world, from Russia to Chile to the US, Canada,
Wow.
France. And we saw that as an opportunity rather than taking an in-house project. I thought it was really important ask the world of what an observatory in Guatemala should look like. So we did that competition. We gave out first, second, and third prizes. It was all anonymous, and I brought in my friends from college, from the US, as my advisors and as my jury. Basically, we made an amazing competition. So I wouldn't say it's a project next, and because they don't really close like chapters ever. I wish they would, but they remain open. I've been pushing this project for over 7 years as well. It's a long project, but it's one of those projects that have a soul. So in a sense, because I see like a confluence of many of my interests and opportunities within the same project. Why an observatory in Guatemala? First, why not? And the second would be because there's also a strong Mayan legacy of how the Mayas understood the universe and how they had a very precise calendar. It's believed that the cenotes in northern Yucatan and northern Guatemala, the cenotes, the sinkholes,
yes,
that are filled with water, served as mirrors where they traced all the constellations. So basically, there is a lot of knowledge. There's a deep understanding on the agricultural seasons based on the equinoxes and the solstice. Basically, understanding the movement of the sun and the moon was very elemental in Mayan culture. So my interest is really bridging the past and the present. But most importantly, we understand that there's a bunch of challenges that we face at the present. We have been identified as one of the most vulnerable regions in the world to climate change by the United Nations. There's nothing in terms of institutions that are working towards fulfilling any action or the need for data in that sense. So everything is very remedial rather than preventive. So we need the science and technology. We have a huge outflux of human talent flocking into the States. And why? Because there's not a lot of opportunities. And yes, we still are an agricultural country, but we need to get technified. Otherwise, if we don't create new opportunities through technology, that's where this project comes in. Through the observations of the stars and the climate, that's how you begin to promote sustainable practices, and you promote new opportunities for entrepreneurs that are looking to technify agriculture as well. And basically, in a mouthful, this is what the project intends. It was a struggle to find the land. A year and a half ago, we finally found a partner that decided to jump on board, and now we have a land. Now we have the local municipality as on board, and we're working on the zoning for it. We're really taking care of making the project right. So we haven't been really outspoken with the vision as of yet, because we really want to make the project really bulletproof, that everything's really taken care of our due diligence in terms of understanding the intricacies. And yes, it's a completely private project. Why? Because we have found that the public institutions are really weak, and by making it private, it's with the same spirit in mind that it's open to the public, is how you begin to secure it.
I'm exceedingly excited to see how, the information, the data that can come from a scientific center that this observatory is going to create based on the location and the region where the data will be tracked. So I think that the sky is the limit, and it's really quite interesting to see your architectural thought leadership in terms of how you're finding ways to intersect so many different worldviews. Can you talk a little bit about your architectural thought leadership, what it means to you?
I don't really like the spotlight. I actually get quite anxious about it. But in a way, I sort of found myself in where I need to fill in the shoes to a leadership position. And from a professional standpoint, I see each project as a challenge in itself. My mind, how it works. I see the confluence of different issues or problems. I find the recipes. I find the different ingredients. Oh, Guatemala needs this. Let's find a project that sort of fulfills everything in it. So yes, I might be the chef, but I don't cook the entire thing. So I did show some of the projects that they're quite ambitious. One of them are the Popol Jay in itself is not. It's not my own. I'm a tiny little fragment. I'm the shaper, if you want to call me that.
Right.
But my role is really articulating, and that's basically how I began to understand my profession, that I'm simply someone that materializes somebody else's dreams. And as long as I keep my ego in check, that it's not about building my own ego. It's about really building something that it's impactful for others. I guess that would be my legacy, even if it's a quiet one, And I guess that's what musical conductors do. They don't actually play an instrument. They really conduct the orchestra. And that's what architects really do. I haven't laid a brick myself, but In a way, it's picking up the fragments, understanding what the problem is, and finding a solution for it. If you want to see that as a leading role.
Absolutely, because leadership is showing up with your gifts and how your gifts positively help and elevate those around us. There's different ways that we can look at leadership. And I think that's actually one of the most strongest and most powerful ways is when we're elevating, giving each other the hand and say, okay, I'm going to lift you and we're going to climb together. We're going to do this together. So I think that that's actually quite powerful and something that we can learn from and use as an example. With that said, I'd like to ask you one last question. Is there any advice that you can share in terms of what you've learned throughout your career that might be helpful?
Yes, I would say be mindful of whom you surround yourself with. Be very mindful of understanding who your friends are, your mentors are people who are actually maximizing your inner potential, not their potential. So I think be mindful of who you actually aspire to be. I think one of my most important lessons would be to keep your imagination in check as well. If you're a creative, is bring people that you cherish their opinion and check if your imagination is sound and it's tangible imagination. It can actually be executed. So in a way, it's shooting for the stars with your 2 feet in the ground. It's about aspiring to be the best in what you do. And I think in terms of operating, and especially if you have a US audience, is that yes, the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. Yes, it is. But once you're on the other side of the fence, the grass before it was greener. So I think there's a saying in Spanish that says, El perico es verde donde quiere. It means the parrot is green where he wants to be green. That means that there's a conviction in your interest and your objectives that really drives to excel wherever you go, no matter what. I think determination, conviction, and passion has to be something that really drives innovation and leadership rather than the other anti-values that we see promoted through social media.
Thank you. That was an incredible, heartfelt message and advice. Thank you. So I will no longer ask you any more personal questions. However, if people wanted to learn more about the projects that you're working on, is there a place that you can direct them to visit?
I do have a place. Let me share that with you. And it's through a QR. It's going to be simple, but basically, muchas gracias. And I'm going to say that in Spanish. Many thank you to Cindy as well and to your program. But follow us through Torus.design. That's our website. And there's all the information is in there. And a lot of our initiatives and different projects and so forth. But let me ask you a question. What made you start this podcast?
I resigned from my previous job where I was director of a center at a university. It was a lovely job, but I decided it was time to come back home and be closer to family. It was a time of a lot of soul searching of what do I want to do next with my life and what can I do that can have a positive impact on society? What gift can I give the world? When I thought of this podcast, I thought of a place where conversations could be held about different topics with people from different backgrounds, different traditions, different belief systems, and for those conversations to just spark something in us, whether it's we're learning something or it motivates us. That's my gift to the world. The time that I'm spending doing this podcast, I want it to grow in a way that it's something very positive and inspirational for people and a place where ideas are exchanged. I feel we've learned so much through you today. We learned quite a bit about Guatemala that maybe some of our audience members, at least in North America, may not know about, or somebody in Europe. However, someone from Central America may know this. I also wanted to stress this idea of being authentic to who we are and the gifts that we have. The people that I'm inviting to the podcast have something beautiful within them, some type of gift that is being shared with the world. So you are sharing your beautiful design gifts and the way that you're respecting different traditions. And that's been such an honor. I've had other people on the podcast who are working towards peacemaking because their gift to the world is being peaceful and honoring human life in places of conflict. I've had people who talk about how art is basically a practice for social change. The whole idea with PreZence, it was a play on the word Zen, to have the peace within, being present, being here in the now versus on our phone, trying to see what the next best thing is. And instead of doing that, just being present and engaged with you. And also what comes before you become present or sent. You go through a journey of self-discovery, and we are learning about how we are discovering ourselves through our journey. So you went through your journey of returning to Guatemala, and I've also gone through my own journey starting this podcast. I'm also writing another book at the moment. That's part of this next stage in my life. That's why I started this podcast.
I think it's really remarkable what you're doing, and thanks for giving space for really sharing the ideas and having a little bit of resonance across the borders and up in the US. And it's always an honor to reconnect with all friends and sharing a little bit of our insights. And to be honest, it's really a personal journey that I'm sharing, because I would say architecture is a sort of an art form. It's a has a highly rational component and a very passionate component as well, that's rooted in philosophy and in context and culture and so forth. It's really rooted as well on trying to solve immediate problems. And so in a way, it's a language, how we speak, and it's very personal as well. So thank you for the space and the time, and looking forward to hearing many of your future podcasts.
Thank you, Alejandro. It's been an honor once again, everybody. Alejandro Biguria. And for more information on some of the projects he was working, once again, you could either scan the QR code for the image he showed us, or for those of you only listening to the audio, you can go to Torus.design, Torus.design.com. No,
without the .com.
Without the .com.
.com.
Okay, without the .com, just Torus.design. Beautiful. Until next time. Thank you for joining us on PreZence. For more information on how you can create greater levels of impactful presence in your professional and personal life, visit www.cindyurrutia.com and follow me on social media. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. Feel free to post a comment and we'll read it on the show.